Hello, in this section we're going to be looking at the Mughal Empire. So if you, just as kind of review, remember here's the Safavid Empire, which is connected to modern day Iran. To the west of it would have been the Ottoman Empire, and then down here is India. And the Mughal Empire, and the Mughals are interesting because they're kind of connected to a group of Mongols who converted to Islam, right? Notice Mughal sounds a lot like Mongol. The Mughal Empire is going to start off small, right? It's going to basically be groups of Muslims who will start forming a state here in northern, what's today northern India and Pakistan, but eventually they're going to expand and they get all the way down here and unite much of what is today now India, right? So this is a very large, very successful, very powerful Islamic empire. Now, while they are able to conquer all this, they do face a very serious problem, right? They all face a very serious problem. They are a Muslim minority ruling a Hindu majority, right? This is a Muslim minority ruling a Hindu majority. Now, you may say, well, why is that a problem? After all, the Ottomans conquered Byzantium, which was a Christian empire, and for a long time, Ottomans ruled over areas that were majority Christian. So why is that a problem? Well, the problem has to do with what Hinduism is and how it's different from Islam and Christianity. So we use Hinduism as a term to describe the various religions in what is now India. I don't want you to think that there's like a church of Hinduism, like an organized institution. It's not. It's just a term, like I said, that describes all these different religious traditions in what would eventually become the modern country of India. Now, what's key about Hinduism, for our purposes, is that Hindus could worship many different gods. For example, they could worship Ganesh. One of the most, I don't know, this tends to be a god that many people enjoy. He's got a neat story behind him why he has an elephant for a head and things. He's a god of good fortune and good luck and wisdom. And so he's a very popular god. I had a professor who was a specialist in India, and he had a honk if you like Ganesh, or honk if you love Ganesh bumper sticker. But in any case, Hindus could worship many different gods, whilst Muslims could only worship one god. And so this is kind of a thing. When Muslims conquered Christians, they said, well, the Christians, they kind of misunderstand God, but they did get a revelation from God. They do believe they worship only one God. So, we should tolerate them. But from the perspective of Muslims, Hinduism is a kind of idolatry, right? You're only supposed to worship the one true God. How can you worship all these different false gods? And there was no belief that Hindus had received a revelation from God, so they weren't people of the book. So what are you supposed to do with them? Right? Previously, Muslims had mostly encountered Christians and Jews and other people who it was fairly easy to kind of think of as monotheists, and so easily kind of just say, well, we can tolerate them if they pay the tax. But what do you do with these Hindus, these people who worship many different gods, who commit, from the Islamic perspective, the sin of idolatry? And someone who had to deal with that was this guy named Akbar. Right? He was a Mughal emperor who had to figure out how to deal with this. Now, as an aside, if you see someone's name with an R by it, that means they're a king, and R means ruled or reigned. So this isn't the years he lived, these are the years he reigned. And you can see he reigned for a very long time. And he had to face a very difficult situation. Do we tolerate Hindus and let them keep their religion? Or do we force them to convert? Right? They're not people of the book. So we don't necessarily have to give them that option. We could force them to convert. Or do we tolerate them and have them pay the tax? Well, Akbar realized that Hindus were very attached to their religion, and that if he tried to force them to convert, they would fight back. And remember, this is a Muslim minority. So if there's a fight, they may very well lose. So Akbar decides to tolerate. He decides, I'm not going to try and force Hindus to convert to Islam. In fact, he goes even further. He doesn't even make them pay the religious tax on Hindus. Right? Remember, the Christians and Jews have to pay a religious tax to keep their religion. Akbar will let Hindus keep their religion without paying any tax. So he's actually going to be more tolerant than Islam requires. Right? He's not going to force Hindus to convert to Islam. He's also not going to force them to pay the taxes. And Akbar will even go so far as to form his own religion called the Divine Faith, in which he tried to draw on different religious traditions to kind of find a middle ground to unify everyone. And as you can guess, Orthodox Muslims were not particularly happy about that. They thought this was rather odd and rather strange, right? Wasn't everything they needed in the Quran. And you can see this is an image of Akbar here, and he's talking to different religious leaders. And these guys here are Jesuits. Remember we talked about Matteo Ricci and how the Jesuits got to China and Japan. They're also in India. Those guys can pretty much go anywhere. Now, why would Akbar do this? Well, his overriding concern is maintaining his state, the Mughal Empire, and maintaining social order. Right? So again, for reasons of state, he's going to decide to be more tolerant than Islam requires. And so again, this is, I think, fascinating. Remember, the Ottomans, for reason of state, are going to decide to be less tolerant by forcing Christians to convert to Islam, to form the Janissaries. Akbar is going to do the opposite. He's going to be more tolerant than Islam requires, right? He doesn't force the Hindus to pay the tax in order for the good of the empire, for the good of social order, because he's in a different circumstance, right? As a minority here, much smaller than the Ottomans, he isn't really in a position to make Hindus do what he wants to do. He has to kind of meet them halfway. They're willing to serve in his government, in his state, and put up with Muslim rule as long as they're allowed to keep their own traditions, and he accepts that. Now, because of this, Akbar is often seen as kind of a hero today because he's seen as tolerant, as progressive. But one thing I would point out as a historian is that tolerance does not mean pacifism. Akbar used the stability that this policy gained to go out and conquer more. So tolerance here makes conquest possible because he was willing to allow Hindus to keep their religion. They weren't going to fight back as hard against him, and they weren't going to rebel against him in the way that they would have if he tried to force them to give it up. For a while, the Mughal Empire is going to do really well. They conquer all this territory. They're going to hold it. They're going to do really well. They're going to continue to expand and be able to control the territory that they expand into. Now, one thing, though, that helps make this expansion possible is going to be that they're going to borrow technology from Europe. Particularly, they're going to borrow cannons and guns, a lot of gunpowder technology, but they don't adopt the ideas behind it. To put it another way, the Ottomans are really good at adopting technology, but not so much the science that underlays that technology. Right? They're not going to be particularly interested in science. So we're going to see another case where the kind of emphasis on stability, this is similar to what we saw in China, and their own success is going to make them not so interested in science. They're happy to adopt technology, they're happy to adopt useful techniques, but that's not their main interest. Moreover, one thing that the Mughal Empire is really good at is making great cotton and making wonderful cotton cloth, and that's why I had this image here of this woman making cotton, or kind of refining cotton so it can be used to make cloth. And the thing is, people from all over the world, including Europe, are going to come to India to get Indian cloth. That's great. As we'll talk about later, ocean voyages are very dangerous. It's really nice if people come to you instead, right? You don't want to go out shipping, go out on long ocean voyages that could get you killed. Wouldn't it be nice if people came to you, brought you stuff, and then you don't have to mess with it? And that's essentially what happened, right? India was so wealthy, was manufacturing such great things as this wonderful cotton cloth that they profited from international trade and their economy to develop, but they never felt a need to go out and explore or to develop a strong navy. Why would you go exploring, which is very dangerous, when people are willing to come to you? Why would you need to develop a strong navy to protect your overseas colonies? You don't have any. You don't need them. So, in a sense, power will discourage development in the Mughal Empire. It's very similar to China. They do so well for so long that they don't really see a need to develop science. They don't see a need to go out and explore. Now, the Mughal Empire will continue to expand, but then will go into decline. And a lot of that has to do with this person here, Aurangzeb. Right? So, one thing I'll say about Aurangzeb, remember that picture we saw of Akbar, where he was surrounded by all these different religious teachers? This picture of Aurangzeb shows him alone reading a book. You could bet that that book is the Quran, and it shows that he was a strictly Orthodox Muslim. He wanted to unify his realm. He wanted to build up unity in the Mughal Empire and then use that unity to continue to expand. Right? If we're all unified, we're stronger, and then we can expand. And so he wants to try and get everyone to be Muslim. Right? That's his goal. He has the correct religion. He wants to make sure that everyone follows it, and that will help unify the empire so that he can expand even further. He will attempt to institute a religious tax on Hindus. Right? He's going to start forcing Hindus to pay that religious tax if they want to keep their religion, and he will also attempt to enforce Islamic orthodoxy. He will even destroy Hindu temples. This is very unpopular, and you can believe that many people resisted him. There was a lot of rebellions that he faced. A lot of non-Muslims fought back. Not particularly popular among non-Muslims. And of course, they were the majority of the population. Now, the thing was, Aurangzeb was successful for a time. He was a very powerful guy, scary in a sense. But in the end, of course, he died. And after he died, his sons would fight amongst themselves, and they just weren't as strong-minded or as powerful as him. And the Mughal Empire then went into decline. It turns out Akbar had followed the correct religious policy from the perspective of maintaining a state. Right? This shift to an empire that is intolerant when the majority of the subjects are not when the majority of subjects are not is Muslim is a problem. So what this means is you have a weak state, but a wealthy country. The Mughal Empire is still very wealthy. There's still a lot of commercial enterprise. There's still a lot of business. The economy is healthy. But the government is weak. So imagine you have a wealthy person with a house full of riches that they can't defend. You better believe thieves are going to come rob them. And the Mughal Empire then will become a prize, particularly to the British. Right? You have this power, this very wealthy country with lots of resources, lots of trade, but a state that cannot defend it. So, kind of summing up what we've said about Islamic civilization, despite the fact that they had so much wealth, so much power, right? The Ottomans, remember, are able to destroy this ancient Christian empire, Byzantium, that had stood for hundreds and hundreds of years. Despite that, in a sense, the power, the wealth, and in some places, particular interpretations of Islam prevented an interest in developing science or exploring. If you're wealthy and powerful, why would you go out exploring? It's dangerous. Why would you develop science? It doesn't seem particularly useful at first. Just get the technology. But because they don't, in a sense, because of their great success, Islamic civilization, like East Asian civilization, is not going to be pursuing these things. And this will leave open the opportunity for Europe, Western Christian civilization, or Judeo-Christian civilization, however you want to term it, to be able to be the first ones to have a scientific revolution and lots of other revolutions that will propel them to power.